Awesome. So if you guys can all find a seat now. Thanks for showing up early, grabbing some pizza and beer. Cool. Awesome. Hey guys, thanks for coming down. This is a unique SF New Tech experience. We're grateful for our hosts here at AKQA. This is the second event that we've had here that focuses on UX and UI. And we're glad you're a part of it. Just by show of hands, I'm real curious, who here in the room is a designer? Who's an engineer? Cool. Who's looking for work? Who has too much work? Who's taking the rest of the summer off? Nice. All right. We're not going to bore you with ads or anything along those lines. I want to welcome Christopher Marsh, Director of Technology from AKQA. He's our host tonight. And if it weren't for Chris, we wouldn't be here. So thank you to Chris.
Thanks very much, Myles. So I'm fairly recent to San Francisco. I've been hanging out here for about 4 months. Been working at AKQA for about the past 6 years, so I'm gradually getting rid of my uptight UK ways and falling into the laid-back California lifestyle. So it's great to have everybody here. Over in the London office at AKQA, I've been hosting different meetups there for a while, and it's really great to get different people through the door. And in fact, we started hosting our own there, Tech Insight, and I'm happy to say we're going to start launching those here a little bit down the line, so towards the end of October, I'm sure we'll be able to get some information out to you guys. Okay, so in tune with my uptight London background, I have to go through some basics. So there's no fire alarms planned, so if the fire alarm goes off, the exit is over there. If you haven't found it already, the ladies' toilets are just over there. Sorry, bathroom over there. Toilets in the bathroom. And gents are over there. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. Yep. Stephen, thanks very much.
You guys hear that? Yeah. So Stephen Roman is Director of Technology over at Samsung.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Great. So I am at Samsung. I spent a lot of time thinking about UX strategy and working in our Samsung Research and Development Office, which is in San Jose. We're moving to Mountain View at the end of the year. You may have seen our building that's under construction across from Moffitt. And we have a bunch of UX labs where we work on mobile, video display, software innovation, things like that. So what I wanted to talk to you tonight is basically a story about form factors and some possibility to talk about how brands might be able to exploit those form factors. And the 4 form factors that I think I want to, or the 4 things I want to talk about really are the concept of a fully interactive 3D telepresence window, some virtual and augmented reality, something about wearable sensors and the Internet of Things, and finally some artificial intelligence. I want to start with this. Sorry. I want to start with this. This is the something that maybe you should be thinking about. Right now you might be familiar with Samsung and the round TV and the Ultra HD video display. We're going to be producing a screen with so many pixels that the human eye can't possibly see them all, no matter how close you get. That's just in the cards. So why are we doing that? And it's largely because we're going to expect that those pixels are going to have different jobs, that it's not going to just send light to you, it's going to send light to the person next to you. So if I would anticipate seeing parallax effects on both the X and Y axis with multiple viewpoints, the possibility of not only doing lean in but lean out, and perhaps dome pixels that bend like based upon where your eyes are tracked and what you're looking at. And the idea is that it's going to create a transformative and transporting interaction where your video display is going to be and perform very much like you were looking through an actual window. You'll turn your head this way and you'll see around the corner. You'll turn your head this way and you'll see up that way. And the idea is that you'll have a telepresence display in your house, you'll have a telepresence display in the grandparents' house, and you'll have full interaction. What I'm really excited about is that that same camera array that will be able to produce that effect could possibly be in the Piazza Navona in Rome, and then you in your apartment in San Carlos can have a balcony view of the Piazza Navona. I don't think that that's going to be very far out into the future. I think you can expect to see that fairly close on. And the reason why that's going to be very important is that brands like the Ritz-Carlton, which has maybe a stunning view out of a hotel window, can offer that to customers in their homes, or perhaps you're a fan of the Boston Red Sox like I am, and you'll be able to see directly into a dugout. First-person shooters. This is what I'm talking about with virtual reality. My prediction is that in December of 2015, we're going to see an Oculus and Morpheus under every Christmas tree. And I don't know if you've tried this yet, but playing a video game with a virtual reality goggle on is pretty amazing. Playing a first-person shooter game is a totally different experience. And parents are going to buy these things for their kids, and they're going to want to find content that they can view that isn't a game. So the game is a lead-in sort of content. The branded related content will be a sort of lean-back content that parents can enjoy as well. The next thing I wanted to talk about were wearables. I was wondering if anyone understands the relationship between Archduke Ferdinand and the most successful wearable of all time. Does anyone understand what that is? Does anyone know? No. Okay. What's that? The World War I created the most successful wearable of all time because it required that troops coordinate their movements, and there was no way to communicate across battle lines, so they had to synchronize their watches. So the wristwatch is the most successful wearable of all time, and it got massive adoption because of troops being in, specifically officers being in war. You can see that this is an example with a metal grate over the glass because those had a tendency to break. And you can talk about how important this would have been if you were in a trench in World War II, World War I, and you had to go over the top at the exact same time. We have the exact opposite problem happening right now, where the use of wearables is basically abandoned after 6 months. And why is that? I think it's because they're not filling a need. And we don't really have, there is no real good compelling need to have a different kind of wearable that we don't already wear. And one of the things I'm wondering about is, will augmented reality change that? And when I think about World War I think about the soldiers in World War I, and I think about the soldiers that we have in Iraq and Afghanistan right now, and what sort of augmented reality they're experiencing. Will they be the same ones that come back and say, this is what worked for me while I was in Iraq, this is what worked for me in Afghanistan, and maybe they'll be the key to give us a wearable that will actually wear longer than 6 months. The other people that I think you need to talk to about augmented reality are brands. We have the sensor and the Internet of Things and a IoT solution that's already underway today. If any of you are Star Wars Platinum members, you know that you have one of these, which is essentially a wearable. This is your key card to your room. And this is a fully authenticated device that allows you to pass through a locked door. And I can't believe how many startups I see that are looking at opportunities for them to allow you to gain security over your house by opening your door of your car, opening your door of your front door, but this has been solved by hotels a long time ago. And I think it's an example that when we think about the IoT and sensors and any user experience around that, we have to think about the brands that currently exist and what they're currently doing about user experience. The last thing I want to talk about is artificial intelligence. Is anyone familiar with the Turing test? So, in the first week of June, the first Turing test was ever the first Turing test was passed ever, and it was a program called Eugene Gutzman, which was programmed by some Ukrainians. And what they did is they created a artificial intelligence that you could have a conversation with. And the Turing test basically says that in a given panel of humans, 1/3 of them will be fooled by a computer pretending to be a human. And this actually happened in June in London. And what they did is they figured that in order to create interesting answers for the panelists, they would have to adopt they would have to create a persona called Eugene Gutzman, who was a 13-year-old boy. So in their user experience, they created the illusion that you'd be talking to a kid who might have an odd way of speaking or a unique way of speaking, and it would be very consistent with what you'd expect from that. And then I want to show you two pictures from two Superman movies. So this is Marlon Brando, and he played Jor-El. And I'm showing you this because this movie came out late 70s, early 80s, maybe 1979. And I don't know if you remember, but in The Fortress of Solitude, he has a whole artificial intelligence scenario where he is anticipating Superman's questions, and he has a whole series of canned answers. And so we understand that, at that point in time, I remember we understood that as, okay, Jor-El is so smart that he can anticipate every one of Superman's questions. But things changed. By the time we get to Man of Steel, Russell Crowe is a fully realized artificial intelligence presence that has the ability to understand exactly what the question is, understand it in context, understand how to respond, and understand it in just the full semantic nature of the actual meaning of the sentence. So that would require to understand things like context, natural language processing, and a whole series of other technologies that are under development today. So I think from a brand perspective, we should fully anticipate a conversation perhaps with a representative of a brand, such as maybe the Kool-Aid Kid, and you can have a conversation online or via your mobile device, or maybe Priceline's William Shatner, and you can have a conversation. A completely virtual Shatner would be no less than awesome. So that's what I wanted to leave you with, to dream of a fully realized William Shatner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the way we're going to do this, each speaker, we're going to take just a few questions for each speaker, and then we're going to bring everybody back at the end, and we'll just do a nice little round table after that. So if you have a question or two for Stephen, raise your hand and I'll find you. Really?
I actually think the more interesting context for AI is actually emotional intelligence. That's one area that's not been explored. Strange enough, we were explored about 20 years ago. It's fallen by the wayside. I think ways for dealing with the emotional context of situations is a very powerful way to motivate people. And I would suggest doing that.
Thank you, Kurt. Anybody else? Okay. Stephen, we'll see you back up here after.
Thank you.
Any stragglers? You guys awake?
Yeah.
Next up, I want to introduce you to Denis Griffith. He's the head of UX for marketing over at Salesforce. Denis is new to town, so definitely give him a warm welcome.
Well, it's my third trip back,
Third
actually.
trip back.
Yeah.
Almost a local.
Almost locally, yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to talk about a little bit about Salesforce in a different context than most people talk about it. Is that there's like 300 UX people over at One Landmark with that work on R&D. And prior to me joining up with Salesforce in March, there was no UX for the marketing. So you would go to salesforce.com and either a vendor or somebody by gut had decided what users wanted in terms of building some kind of customer path for lead generation. So imagine coming into a place where most people design for product, and in this case, I'm coming in and saying, wow, this is great from the gut, and this is great from analytics, but what is the story that we're trying to tell? And one of the challenges that I have today, I'm in my 5th month right now, is that when you go to Salesforce.com, you need to see a story. And my background, just to kind of give you ideas, I've been in advertising for 18 years. My background's in English Lit and English education. So one of the things that really always mesmerized me about marketing and user experience is that when users see narrative, they will go along path or task. But in a product, and on product side and application side, that's not always the case. So one of the things that I wanted to do when I first, my second day, I'm sitting in a room, there's copywriters and there's some analysts, and they're saying that this is our, oh, I'll need a password. I know there was some Samsung, maybe not. There we go. So I'm just going, you see here where this messaging is? And if I scroll down the page, you see all these things about features. So I'm sitting in this meeting on my second day, and we're trying to sell in, by the way, this is the first time that anybody for UX on marketing has sat within Salesforce. And one of the things that we were talking about is we were going to focus group this, right here, this messaging. This is the pricing and additions page. This is probably, arguably, the most important asset, high-value asset, in the experience on Salesforce.com. Because you as a prospect, or even you as a current customer, you may want to upsell, you may want to sign up, and one of our big things is all about this free trial over here. Feel free to sign up for a free trial afterwards and mention me. So then, so I'm sitting there, and we're talking about how we're going to focus group this here. And we're going to focus group the messaging up here. And we're talking about maybe we need to rephrase these. Anyone know what the problem is with that? We're going to spend thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, to get people in a room and do focus group on this messaging. But I had a theory. I've worked in e-commerce for a long time. I helped redesign the Emirates.com page. I've worked in, on Amazon projects. I've worked on Netflix. One thing I can tell you, you know what people look at? What is it?
Numbers.
Price. Exactly. So I sat there in the room and I said, before we do this, we need to do an eye tracking test. And everybody looked at me with like blank stares, and they were like, what? What's an eye tracking test? And I went over to talk to Charles Warren, who was head of UX design for product. And went and talked to him and said, I want to do an eye tracking test for this pricing and addition page, because before we spend the money and get our customers in for a focus group and think about all these words and what they're saying, we need to think about where they're saying it. And at the time, Charles said, well, I'm not a big fan of eye tracking tests when it comes to UX. And I said, well, that may be the case in UI. When it comes to product, there's a task and the user is going to come in and they have a specific task in mind. But in marketing, we have to show a narrative. And we have to manipulate the user. We have to guide them to a path. We have to guide them to a choice. And if we're not seeing the message, we're going to be spending a lot of money on messaging and not really thinking about the page holistically from a UX perspective. So I got the keys to the Cadillac, as I call it, that was made in 1975. Because when I went down into the eye tracking lab at Salesforce, it was dark, it was dank, there was cobwebs, there was no branding whatsoever. It was hidden way back, in the corner of the space on one landmark. And went in there, dusted the cobwebs, got out the Toby, and brought in an objective UX researcher to do eye tracking. And what we did was we had an eye tracking test, and it clearly showed that users went right to the number, and they went to the number with what? Most popular, because this is a bigger unit than the rest of the other units. And what they found out, and which was disappointing to some, all those copywriters in the room, is that nobody was looking down here. No one. No one looked past plus. Nobody even compared what version was what. What they did was they went to most popular, and you know what the next number they looked at for most popular? Biggest asset, and then what? Cheapest. right? And then they go from cheapest, and then they kind of go work their way up. And they didn't look at this. We were going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to try to figure out the wording for that. And we were also going to try to figure out, how we were going to phrase these things. And any user that actually scrolled, and by the way, every user scrolled. So anybody that said, oh, well, nobody's going to look beyond the columns because no user scroll, every user scrolled. And I don't know about anybody else, UX practitioners in the room. If you've ever gone through a user test, if you've not seen a user scroll. But here, we had people scrolling. You know where they went? They went down here. And why? Because it was a link. And so one of the things that we looked at, or what we're going to be doing, not to give away, but you can kind of see the solution here, is that these things need to be clickable, and they need to somewhat tell a story, but also there was a gestalt effect up here on the top where nobody was engaging or doing anything up at the top, and nobody knew like what the difference between platform, chatter, data.com. They knew sales, service, marketing cloud, but when you got down to it, the nomenclature was a little lost. What's my point in this? Is that I now have eye tracking testing funded for an entire year. Whereas before, this wasn't, when it came to UX and trying to sell the fact of what UX needs to do for marketing, what it needs to do to tell a story beyond analytics. Analytics tells you the story of the click, but it doesn't tell you about why they click. And eye tracking does do that and helps that. It's not the one-all, the be-all, but it is a marriage. And you can't have one without the other, particularly with lead generation, because it really comes down to user versus preference. And so I guess the kind of the moral of the story is that you're not seeing the redesigned page now, but you will. Yes, I'm hiring. Don't swarm me afterwards. But really, one of the big things here is that this was a small eye tracking test where I went out and got the kit, spent about $5,000, and saved us a lot of money and a lot of heartache and a lot of copywriters' times in order to really kind of sell something. And so when we look at like high value assets like this, or we look at maybe forms, look at global navigation, we can do the eye tracking test. Of course, you have to use that discriminately, but I'm a big advocate of going down that road. And you really only need 5 users. Nielsen even says that. You don't need to go more than 5 users. So that's kind of an anecdote to what I had to deal with over at Salesforce to kind of sell UX through. And I'll tell you, got big believers now, and people are kind of listening when it comes to UX. That's it. Questions?
Thank you. You know the drill. Hands up if you have a question for Dennis. One here.
So what are the inherent fallacies or problems that you see with eye tracking? Like, I understand the good that comes off, but from a UX perspective, what are the problems that you do see arising from having too much of a focus in just eye tracking?
I actually see more of the problem, good question, I see more of the problem being in the questions that are being asked by the facilitator. That, it's really important to not lead the task. And the challenge really is in terms of the prompting. Eye tracking is great when you have a really naturalistic behavior, you're looking for a behavior, and then you prompt prior or after that behavior. So you might pull up a page and not really prompt them. And then you get kind of that instinctive look to it. Another thing that I actually we actually had one subject that we had to throw out as an outlier because she, as a customer, had designed her prices and addition page for her company off of Salesforce's pricing and additions page. So she knew everything about that page. So in terms of how she built it and kind of her think aloud, it was like, oh, well, I did this because I did this because. So we recorded the interview, we documented it as an outlier, but we didn't make it part of the entire consensus of it. And that's why you try to do, even though Nielsen says you don't need any more than 5, we aim for like anywhere between 8 and 12.
So in looking at the product that you're selling, it's a complex, multi-layered product.
A series of products.
Series of products.
Yeah.
So in terms of trying to sort of narrate through the story and do an eye tracking test on a single page,
Yeah.
how do you see looking at kind of multi-page navigation and trying to understand cognitively how people are putting that together in their heads?
I think part of that is, I talked about prompting, but there's a certain amount of mental modeling that happens. So when you have prospects or customers, when they're qualified and recruited and they come in, you know, some of the questions about their decision-making process starts to put a narrative in their head, right? So it's, you know, who are you in the organization? Are you influential in the decision-making process? Are you so on and so forth? And the person starts to kind of start to put that formulation of what their expectations are on page. And what was actually much more eye-opening, of course, was not really the customer, but the prospect, because the prospect are really seeing the page for the first time. So in terms of kind of that behavior, it's kind of structuring that mental model in advance, not by prompting them on what they're going to see, but really kind of doing a role play. It's kind of like, you know, kind of getting them to role play and kind of getting into that mindset before they first hit that page. And really, actually, one of the things I should have pointed out is I couldn't show the eye tracking test because I think Mark Meninoff would have me I wouldn't have a job, and then I'd be looking for a job. There goes Dreamforce. So one of the things, and I really want to go to Dreamforce. But I think like one of the things is like when you look at it is we actually started the journey from the global navigation. Actually said, can you find pricing in addition? One thing that we didn't notice, you notice all those tabs that were up on the top, right? That you could go and see these other products. Behaviorally, we prompted them afterwards a post-interview question. This is post-eye tracking. We prompted them and said, can you give us the price of data.com? Data.com was up there in the tab. And you know what the user did? They went to the global nav, they left the page, went to the global nav, and go to data.com, then to the pricing and additions from data.com. They didn't actually go from the actual pricing page that was supposed to be all-encompassing across it, because they had a stream, they had a type, and that was every single user. Every single user did that journey.
All right.
Thanks.
Dennis, come back up later.
Cool.
Great. Thank you. Great. Next up, let's welcome Daniel Schwartz. He's Senior Interaction Designer over at Oracle Applications User Experience at Oracle Corporation. Sounds like that was written by HR.
Hi, everybody. Right away.
Just put this in the back.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Just put this on. New wearable technology from Samsung. All right. So my talk today for you is key strategies for designing for the unknown. And I'm Daniel Schwartz. I'm a Myles Weissleder, Senior Designer at Oracle on the Applications User Experience Group. Little disclaimers. So what I'll be talking about today, I'll give you just a really, really brief intro about our UX team and also myself. And then I'll get into some key strategies that I think are really useful for startups, especially when you're incorporating UI design and UX. And then a couple tips on design inspiration, and then hopefully if there's a little bit of time, a little Q&A like my rest of my colleagues. So first little intro. So quickly about myself. I've been at Oracle a little bit over 10 years, and right now I'm the lead designer of Oracle Sales Forecasting. And that's one of the products that's part of the Customer Experience Sales Cloud Solutions. And in the past, I've worked on a lot of different products. That's one reason I've been at Oracle for such a long time. There's so many different products and verticals and things to work on. I worked on manufacturing, financials, also certain products that carry over the different pillars as well. And even though Oracle's definitely not a small startup, when you're working on these different products, you start working with a core group of people. And it almost does feel like its own little startup, little company. So it's fun to switch. So I feel like I worked for a lot of different little companies within Oracle. So a little bit about our applications UX team. We're a really diverse, big global team. And we cover a lot of different areas. We cover HCI, usability research, UI design, application information architecture. And we have a lot of other different types of user experience professionals, as you can see. So in your start speak, you could say we're kind of a full stack UX organization, cover all the bases. I'll tell you a little bit about our UX strategy as well. It's governed by 3 core principles: simplicity, mobility, and extensibility. By simplicity, we mean that our applications are straightforward so that users can complete tasks intuitively. By mobility, we mean that user experience is optimized across devices so that users can access data in the cloud from devices that best suit their immediate task. And by extensibility, it's about giving users tools to easily customize and extend the user experience of out-of-the-box applications to fit the company's identities and also that business process. So designing for the unknown. You guys like my drawing? I did that. It's not copyrighted, you guys can use it. It can be scary, especially how many Myles asked some questions, but actually one key question I have for you is, since the start with them, is how many people here are doing startups? Okay, that's quite a bit. And how many people are not doing startups, but you guys are working on new problems that you've never worked before, new features, or with new users you never know anything about? Wonderful. Yeah, it's scary, but it's very challenging, and it's definitely interesting. And like I said, with Oracle, I worked on a lot of different products with a lot of different users. And with enterprise, you're not always that user. So you really need to have some key strategies down about how are you going to switch your mindsets, how are you going to switch products. And for me, 2 of these design principles have really stuck out. So that way I don't end up looking like him every time I switch products. The first big strategy that I really live by, and I think is so important, especially when you're working on new products or you're working with new people, is number 1, you drill down, you really get to know who you're designing for. It's one of the core user-centered design strategies that you have to employ in user-centered design, and when you're doing unknown products, it's something that you can't skip over. We're always tempted, especially in startups, you have to move quickly, to be really nimble, but if you don't really have a deep dive into who you're designing for, you're going to end up coming back to certain roadblocks, and if you have strong user research and insight, you can probably overstep some of those. So it's one thing if you're designing like a photo application or something that you can empathize with, but if any of you guys are doing enterprise startups or enterprise products or things that you don't normally use, you really need to take the time to do that hard research that Denis was talking about it too, is really seeing what people are really doing. And it'll really help your design process go a lot smoother. I'm going to skip some animations for the sake of time. So remember, when you're beginning to design UI, it's really about simplifying the complex and surfacing what's really important for your users. And you really want to go identify for your users is, what are the roles? What are their tasks? What are their goals? Where do users work? What's their physical environment like? What are the users' technical environment like? What kind of devices are they using? What are they dependent on? What information needs do users have? And who are they working with? Who are they interacting with on a daily basis? You need a solid picture of this, especially when you're designing new products, and it's tempting to skip over. But by doing that hard work and research first, it'll really help you in the long run. Different user roles have different uses for applications functionality. UX is really all about understanding everything encountered to get the task done. And that experience will cross many boundaries, including the types of applications and tools used. So here you see there's a bunch of different sales users, but they have different roles and responsibilities and data and tools that they're using. You can see the accounting manager, look at that user. They're using a desktop interface, they're going to be heavily there. They might also be using Excel and other products that you might not be delivering, but it's in their context. And it's really important for you to know that. It's, we're designing something for an accounting manager. Let's keep in mind that besides our application that we want him to use, he also has Excel open, he has Outlook open. Those are things that you really need to take in context, and if you have strong user research, you'll know that. VP of Finance, you might be more on the tablet, but probably more interested in dashboards or KPIs and things like that. And the sales rep is a user that I've spent a lot of time with, especially designing sales forecasts and things like that. And I'll just give you a really quick story about how user research helped me and helped me drive the design there. Is my understanding coming in there, sales rep always on the go, wonderful, we have tablets now, we're going to bring the apps to the tablets, we can dump everything on the tablet and streamline it to that. But when I started reading all the great user research that my colleagues did and reading some of their day in the life stuff, I learned very quickly that users are doing A, B, and C when they're on the go. When they're meeting with clients, they're doing some other things. And then when they get home, they're doing other tasks, but they're not doing on the tablet, they're doing on their laptop or their desktop computer. So that really drove my design thinking, and also it changed the way that I was working to optimize the design for users, not only in different tasks that they're doing, but different data and different devices throughout the day. The second key strategy that especially is so important when you're designing new products is maybe you have a little bit of a vision about what you want to do, but it's really worth taking the time to craft, prioritize, and refine great user scenarios. So I'm throwing some UX jargon out at you, and like UI, UX, what's the difference, things like that. User scenarios are different from use cases and user stories. User stories are really the kind of the core piece there. Agile development uses a lot. I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing that, especially in startups. And that's where you have a very basic ask, which is, as a user role blank, I can blank achieve some type of goal so that I can blank achieve some type of business value. So that's very core. And then on the other spectrum, there's use cases, which is that times 10, which sometimes QA uses. And there's a lot of detail in those. They cover system interactions and details. And somewhere in the middle, there's what I love using is user scenarios, which is it details out what the user is doing, but it takes away the system interaction stuff. It's focused on the story. So it's actually interesting that, Dennis, you talking about the narratives and the synergy there and stuff like that. So it's interesting in the UI, we definitely don't want to show them a large text and a big narrative when we say textual narrative. But to design a UI that strips that away, and it's really about the functionality of the task, you need to establish the narrative beforehand and have a really solid understanding. You need a great story. And great UX tells a great story. For software UX, user scenarios are the way to do this type of storytelling. To develop great UX, you need great user scenarios so you can articulate the product you want to create to your development team. And you guys have this common framework of understanding, this is how we want this to operate, this is what we expect, this is the pain points. And you want to start off small. You want to start off with what's called goal or task-based scenarios. So this just really states what the user wants to do. You don't include any information about how it's actually done, but this is like the key thing. So here's a quick example from usability.gov. You're traveling to Seattle, you're job next week, you want to check the amount of reimbursed meals, et cetera, et cetera. So very short and sweet, but it kind of captures the point. Do you guys know about usability.gov? Yes. Nice. Of course you do. So that's actually this great UX website developed by the US federal government. It's run by the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's a really great, gives you a lot of great UX tips and guidance about how to do user-centered design. And I definitely recommend it. So start off small. First establish these goal or task-based scenarios. But then, this is what I love, and this is what I always look for when I work with the new product managers and new products, is do you guys have user scenarios? So like, oh, no. We have use cases, so they're ready. That's the same thing, right? I'm like, no. So I take them through this drill. And when we work through and I help them establish it, we create these user scenarios. When we get stuck in the UI design, we come back to these scenarios and we work it through. It's kind of like those SAT courses where they teach you, like, you might not understand it, but take the answers and plug it in. When you have this scenario, you can plug the scenario into your UI, and you'll know if you hit it right, because if your UI works with the scenario, you hit the magic. You've told a great story. And the other thing that's great with this is now there's a common understanding among the whole development team, PMs, developers, QA, about what's the story we're trying to tell. And this way, you're going to be able to, everyone has a deeper understanding about the users and the user characteristics. And also, you're more likely to develop content, functionality, and behavior that users find comfortable and easy to work with. So, just in summary here, to do great user scenarios, you're going to have a better understanding about what users want. And what that's going to result in is a faster, more intuitive and more effective path from point A to point B in your UI and UX strategy. So to wrap up, sometimes we get caught up in especially, when I was thinking about what to communicate here and what to kind of share, I was thinking, in the new products that I work on, sometimes it does feel like a little bit of a startup, and it's really exciting and it's fun to be a part of. But it's really important to keep in mind that not to drop the user-centered design process. And it's so important to not drop the user research, to really understand who you're designing for. Don't skip on that. And also spend the time to create what I showed you here, what's called elaborated user scenarios. QA and them are coming back saying, oh, we have use cases, that's good. No, because that includes the click path and things like that. That means that the UI is already baked. Bring it back to the core, bring it back to the story, because that's the great design. And like Dennis mentioned too, is, and I heard you drop the word story a couple of times, is that's what it comes down to. And when you have a great story and you have a great understanding about what users want, you're going to end up with a great UX. And you might get stuck along the way. Don't stay, when you're doing UX design, especially working with designers like us, we don't always like to stay in the cube. Sometimes we get restless, we want to get out. So when I'm working from home in North Beach, I go out to Washington Square Park, I walk around, I think of a problem, I need to change my point of view. You're not always going to get in the cube. Let your designers have some freedom to get out and think things. Don't keep them boxed in the cube, let them explore a little bit. And designers always seeing what's out there. Great design, just like great architecture, you need to be inspired by life, you need to experience a lot of things. I think architecture and designers just get better with age. We just learn more, we've seen more, we've done more. We have more empathy with people and what they're experiencing. So this is a great site I love. A lot of designers will probably know it, sidebar.io. But if you're not a designer, I definitely recommend it. It's very inspiring. There's always great articles put up and really amazing work done. So here's some more links about our global department and some blogs that we run, and we have a Twitter as well, so feel free to keep in touch. And here's my information as well. So I went kind of fast there. So if you want links to that, feel free to email me or send me something on Twitter, and I'm happy to share those with you, or I can go back if you want to see this as well. And I really appreciate your time, and it's a real honor to speak with you tonight.
Good stuff. Questions for Daniel? Don't be shy. Come on. Daniel, we'll see you in a few minutes.
All right, thanks. That was easy.
You're off the hook easy. All right, let's welcome Yoni DeBuel. Up next, he's a mobile product designer over at Yelp. While Yoni plugs in, let me just give you a quick little story. About a year and a half ago, we did a special event at SF New Tech that focused on mad scientists and inventors. And that's when I first met Yoni. In his side life, he creates rockets and flying instruments. Drones. And drones, as they're more commonly known, right? And before Amazon had a big push about dropping product at your doorstep, Yoni was working on the burrito bomber to deliver burritos to your doorstep or wherever you may be via drone. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, we predated Amazon by almost a full year, I think. That's pretty neat.
Whenever you're ready.
Better. Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm iPad, Android, and mobile site experiences. I had this whole presentation prepared, which was delightfulness on user experience, and it was kind of knowledge sharing, potentially a little bit preachy. And when I saw Steve's presentation just now, I was like, no, that guy's presentation is way better. It's way more focused on innovation. So as I was sitting there, I was throwing everything out and throwing new stuff in. So this is going to be a little bit eclectic. Improv, nice. So I like to show this as a sort of, it's helped me sort of figure out UX for Yelp and mobile in particular. It's sort of a little bit of an overview of mobile usage and sort of how it's influenced me and the Yelp team and sort of figuring out what to build for our mobile products. And so obviously mobile is getting increasingly more popular. We've all got mobile phones, but sort of it's always fun to sort of put it into numbers. And so this is global unit sales. Sort of speaks for itself. Like mobile's doing pretty well, and it's not that PCs or any sort of desktop experience doing less well. It's just sort of a little bit stagnant. These are numbers from Facebook. These aren't public for Yelp yet, maybe someday. And as you can tell, back in 2012, actually, a lot of us still think in terms of when we're designing products, especially us who work on a complex sort of desktop or traditionally desktop-first experience. It's sort of hard to get stakeholders and even yourself sometimes out of that mindset of building it for mobile, building for desktop, and then sort of mobile being an afterthought. As we get better, we sort of build both at the same time. Where if you look at a lot of these numbers, it actually makes a lot more sense to build completely mobile first, and maybe you'll see desktop as an afterthought. And but I like this graph. The part I like most is the mobile-only part, which influences a Yelp a lot. Traditionally, our Yelp app, we've always seen it as more of an add-on or sort of an extension of our desktop site. It was a companion app, sort of. And for a mobile-only user, that doesn't make any sense at all. They want, both from the user's point of view and from a company's point of view, any sort of interaction or any consumption flow or creation flow really needs to be completely on mobile if it matters to you or your users. And so I always try to do this little game in my head where I think if tomorrow all of our desktop usage would disappear overnight, but all those users would transition into mobile, what would that do to our business? What would that do to Yelp? Would it sort of be status quo? We probably did okay. Would it completely destroy Yelp? Or would the company actually sort of thrive? Because, in a lot of regards, or sort of depending on what your business is, mobile users can be even more engaged. That'd actually be a good thing. And so one of the things I hear a lot, and it's true at Yelp a lot also, is when you're thinking about the building a mobile product, is that not every industry or not every sort of product is mobile friendly by nature. Like, oh, I'm doing e-commerce for big things, or I'm doing enterprise. It's not mobile friendly at all. Not entirely true. So when I think of things that if you ask someone you wouldn't think people do on mobile, like eBay sells 9,000 cars a week on mobile. I mean, not something if you would ask me I would think people do, but people do everything on their mobile phone these days. And people buy expensive stuff too. People buy airplanes on mobile. eBay sold this Piper Malibu for $250,000. Someone bought it on their iPhone. And so it's as much as a UX person and designer, I enjoy creating these very minimal experiences and sort of single-focused apps. For a complex model like Yelp, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Our model just happens to be more complex. And it doesn't make sense to sort of hide complexity or hide functionality from users for the sake of it being easier to use. Like, if we're good enough at our job, hopefully we can make everything easy to use. And in having all the features our users want, it's even more easy to use. So, a little bit about Yelp. We currently have about 61 million unique monthly visitors. Although that's less, we still haven't transitioned into mobile being bigger than desktop. Today, about 45% of our total views are mobile. The engagement's much higher. We get about 60% of all our Yelp searches from mobile, and we get a ton of photos through mobile as well. It's about 70% of all our photos come from mobile. So very engaged users there. And if I think of user experience, obviously I'm coming sort of from the mobile end. I found this really interesting study that was conducted back in 2010 by Harris that 75% of users believe in mobile apps to do exactly what they need it to do. So sort of also breaking that mold of, we're going to make our app or our mobile website experience more lightweight version of our desktop. Both the numbers show that that's just doesn't make sense, and users don't want that either. Also, an interesting part of this study was that it showed that even back then, that 73% of all users expected a mobile app or mobile website to be more user-friendly than the desktop equivalent. God, that makes our life hard, because they want same functionality, but on a smaller screen. The input device is reduced to 2 thumbs, and it's got to be more user-friendly. So keeps the job challenging. And especially since, inherently making technology smaller doesn't inherently make it easier to use. Thank God we've evolved a little bit away from this when it comes to wearables. And originally here I was going to show like really real-life examples of how we tackle product at Yelp, and then I sort of just threw it out while I was sitting there. So I just had like a hopscotch of like fun projects that are fairly innovative for Yelp, which sort of show that fun, interesting ways to approach and build features for the masses, for very large groups of users that are fun, innovative, and truly create user delight. Does anyone use Yelp and ever use Yelp Monocle or discover what it is? So this predates me at Yelp, and I've been there for 3 years. It was actually launched in, I believe, 2009, even early 2009, and it was mind-blowing back then. It's even still mind-blowing today. Probably on a weekly occasion when I check Twitter, I'll find something like, oh my God, Yelp Monocle, the future is now. The thing is like 5 years old. And so basically what it is you hold up your iPhone, and it sort of augments all these Yelp businesses that are around you. And at Yelp we've always just seen it as sort of more of a gimmick. It's not that useful, though I've heard of use case of a lot of users actually using it, but we sort of see it as an after product. We hide it in one of our menus. So now and then people really enjoy finding it, and so it scores high in user delight. It doesn't score so high in just pure functionality. But it is sort of the kind of cool, fun technology we like to experiment with, and we like to be the first out the door with. It sort of shows that it was built back then. And so more recently, we actually found a different sort of similar use case for something fairly similar. One of our engineers was really into image recognition, and we were trying to find a way to incorporate that into Monocle. You would wave your phone around, and it would sort of pick up on what the businesses actually were, reading the text or the logo, and sort of give you information right there. And didn't work out very well, but we did find another very elegant way to incorporate it. And what we did was, out of those 71% of all our photos that come into Yelp, a lot of they're very diverse. A lot of them are business photos, a lot of food dishes, but occasionally they're also menus. We're highly valuable for our users to sort of be able to pick those out, because if you're planning to go into a restaurant and we don't have the menu data, which we do for a lot of businesses, it's sort of easy or fun to know what there is. And so what we ended up doing was hiding this functionality background. And if you take a photo, there's always, every photo app has this step where you approve or, you take the photo, see if it's blurry or not. Meanwhile, back in the background, we're sending that back to the server, trying to figure out if we think it's text. And if we do think it's text, we'll pop you this little thing. I think we currently have this rolled out to about 50% of our traffic. And to me, it was just sort of a really fun little project of scores high on user delight, because we'll only show it to you if we're fairly sure that it actually is a menu. And kind of cool developer victory. Mobile reviews project I did was really fun. And when we launched mobile reviews, we had this tip feature for the longest time, and everyone hated it, including myself. But it really did make sense from Yelp's point of view. Yelp is known for its very high quality, long format reviews. And sort of when we launched our iPhone app back in 2008, we weren't actually sure if people were going to use that on-screen keyboard to write really long content. So we launched Tip as sort of an experiment. It was a textual contribution that users could do on the iPhone. As sort of a stab to figure out what the quality would be like. And yeah, it sucked. Quality was terrible. And it made sense. We were using a very well-established industry pattern back then, which was basically sort of geared towards really fast, really quick, really easy textual contributions. And so as a result, people wrote really quick, really fast, really short textual contributions that didn't come anywhere near to reviews. And so we could have, this is what tips was, we could have just got rid of the photo functionality, boom, we've got reviews, let's launch it, it wouldn't have done great things for Yelp if we would have started including our reviews with these really short tips. And so, went back to the drawing board, sort of tried to look around to see if anyone else was building mobile reviews or long format text, we couldn't find it. And we came up with this really neat flow, which incorporates a lot of really fun interactions, really fun animations, some really good tools here. I use Cork Composer a lot to use this with origami. If you're looking for tools to create this flow where we use framing, behavior modeling, sort of really subtle interaction and really subtle little kicks to enable our users to write this long format content that we were hoping would rival review length on the website. And it, pulled the trigger and see, tried to figure out what happened. It was actually a really smashing success. The numbers aren't public, but definitely check out the flow. And obviously, it scored very high on user delight for our users, simply for the fact that we finally built it after they'd been asking for it for 5 years. But really fun project to do, and sort of cool to figure out new tools to do it. And finally, this is the fun part. Just mobile delight at Yelp, and sort of our emotional design is very important to us. We try not to be this big, boring giant. For anyone who knows Yelp a little bit, we have the lead squad, they throw parties, they've got amazing posters. We try to be fun, we try to be quirky. Burrito Bomber was definitely sort of part of that. We have hackathons where we send things to space. We build burrito bombers, we built, what else have I done? Build a life-size iPhone suit, that's fun. And we try to incorporate this in our apps. And so, to me, it's important to capture the heart and mind of users, to me that's sort of as what delight is. And mind I do with all these boring UX things that I do in my day-to-day job. I try to really build a really good product that sort of achieves the goal that the user wants to accomplish, and also achieves the goals that Yelp wants to accomplish and wants to survive. And only if that's done, it's sort of a prerequisite to delight. If your app does what a user wants it to do, they won't be happy, they'll just be sort of content. But it's a really good starting point to delight them. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can just be creative. We do these sort of low cost but very high delight. We basically butcher our logo a couple days in the year. Legal allows us to do it. They don't ask too many questions, and we don't loop them in too often anymore when we make these. And people really, really enjoy them and really seem to like them. When we did the one for the Olympics, I bumped into this talk thread where our users were saying, I feel like I won a medal, or we're all winners in Yelp eyes. Almost brought a tear to my eye. Like, it's just a silly little logo that I spent 5 minutes on building, threw it over to the developers, and they got it into the build. We're usually late for these. Usually when we're like, wait, isn't tomorrow 4th of July? Oh my God, and we'll build something, and it'll actually be only next year that's in there. We have one for soccer as well, so I saw, there you go. So I saw a lot of tweets recently about that one. Doing really fun things with interaction is fun. Almost probably 2 years ago, we put this, very knowingly put an Easter egg in our app where we hid a hamster and a hamster wheel at the bottom of our settings page. Back then, people still read release notes, so we mentioned him in our release notes, like, we lost our hamster, we don't know where the hell he is. And, we were like, we'll see what people do. And Twitter completely blew up, and people were exchanging messages, like, I can't find a hamster, and there was someone else, he's in the bottom of the settings. And everyone seemed to love it, so we were like, oh, let's just keep building them. And so, basically all our iPhone error cases now have a little hamster there. Very low cost, but very high delight, because it always sucks to throw your user an error message. And you can try to solve, you can try to not make it happen, but at the end of the day, they're trying to look for a restaurant nearby, and they're in a flight with Wi-Fi. Oops. It's simply not going to happen because there's no restaurants up there. And so we'll throw them a ninja hamster that's asking, "Are you a ninja?" People seem to like that. And so I finally, this was for iOS, so we were like, oh wow, let's keep the hamster for iOS, let's make other ones for our other platforms. So you have the dinosaur and Android for all the Android users out there. They're not as prominent as the hamster, so you have to look a little bit harder, but they're in there. And we're doing a dog for the website. And so it culminated into does anyone remember when Apple released its pull to refresh? The ball, you pulled it, sort of turned into, I want to say a lava lamp, but it's actually more snot. And we were like, no, we're not putting snot in our app. So we looked around what everyone else is doing, and everyone's doing a little arrow. You pull down, and the arrow goes up. Very clean, very minimal. We didn't like it. So we were brainstorming, me and one of my PMs. They were like, well, it's heavy, and something comes down, and basically 2 weeks later, we launched this, where it was our pull to refresh rocket heavy. And pulling to refresh isn't like super important in our app. There's a few views where you can do it, but it actually doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. This is nearby, it's our discovery page, so you usually only see this page when you open the app, and the data is fresh right then and there. So you don't really have to refresh, you can. And so we didn't necessarily have a good reason to do it, but we definitely didn't have a good reason not to do it, so we just launched it. And the response has been just absolutely amazing. We've gotten so much mileage out of that little hamster. And it goes against every principle Peter Roms basically says, like keep it minimal, but we just couldn't help ourselves. So really fun. But very often we're sort of surprised ourselves by, we try to build good product, and to me that was sort of that base layer about how by just building really good product you can really delight users as well. And so we did a privacy change. I've never heard anything good follow the word privacy change. Just doesn't happen. I remember when Instagram did their privacy change, it was horrible. It was like a big scene. And so basically we made a change where we were going to allow business owners to see a feed of users' activity, and we would allow you to pick how much they would see. And we defaulted to this basic middle tier. This screenshot isn't actually accurate. The demographics only was sort of the default. You could almost turn it off, or you could turn it on more prominently. But we decided to really build it right. We wanted to show the user what the change was. We really wanted them to understand it. And just because that's what we would have wanted to see if we opened the app. And we actually got a ton of really great response, both on Twitter and on blog, where people were like, Yelp made this amazing privacy policy change. And we were like completely shocked while we were reading, like, an amazing privacy policy change. We didn't know that was even a thing. So we might have invented that one. Hurry up. There's really innovative stuff you can do that doesn't necessarily include a designer. You can enable emoji search, or you can just do, you can just put jokes in your release notes. And we got actually a lot of hate for this one. I don't think everyone understood what Heartbleed was, and people were thinking we were making fun of, like, patience. I don't know. That's it for me. It was a little bit chaotic.
Hello. Good stuff. Thank you.
So, hi. As somebody who almost exclusively goes to restaurants only after Yelping them, there was one feature that was missing forever, which was when you could search for in your search you could see when restaurants are open till. And before on mobile you couldn't do that. So if you're out, you can't go, or you'll go and that restaurant will be closed. So I don't recall when you introduced the feature, but did you notice like a change in more users using mobile after that feature was introduced?
I think we've had it for at least, I think about a year and a half now that we actually introduced the feature. One of the things we bumped into was how to surface it. So we put it under setting. We introduced it when we redesigned our filters page as part of our search experience. We didn't necessarily see usage go up, and we didn't really expect to, because we didn't announce it as a new feature. It wasn't like a new functionality we introduced, like reviews. But it was definitely one of our more requested features that we ourselves also needed. And so Going forward, we're looking into new ways to surface Open Now being one of them, sort of anticipate user behavior a little bit more. Right now you have to actively go into filters to sort of figure out like, it's 1 a.m. and I'm searching for a restaurant, like Yelp should probably be smart enough to anticipate that you probably want something that's open now. And so definitely something we're very passionate about and we're looking into more.
But it's still cool that you can at least see like when it's open till. I mean, if you're looking for
It's
something
true,
later.
and we've gotten smarter the way we signal it as well. We'll, instead of signaling open now, when it's like closing in 2 minutes, we'll actually show closing in 2 minutes instead of just open now, which is accurate, but not really.
Hi, I see that you introduced a new service called Message. And I tried it a few times, so some works pretty well. I get reply right away, like right away meaning then a few hours later. Some I don't get replies at all. And one actually didn't know that he got a message from Yelp and asked me to call him instead. So how do you see that? Like, would it affect? Because I was thinking that Yelp was helping me to connect with the retailer, but on this hand, it seems like the retailer doesn't really know what's going on.
Yeah, so we actually launched 2 new messages features recently. One, we enabled users to message each other through the app, something they didn't traditionally have. Sort of part of the build functionality we think is important to our users and to Yelp. And the other is message to business, which is I've been using a lot recently as well, which is very convenient if I'm in a place or I just it's late and I know the business is closed, where you can actually just send a message to the business instead of having to call them. And so the way it works is we've actually just turned functionality on for all our businesses who have a claimed Yelp account, to whose email we have. And so the way the feature works, because it's very new now, it's sort of turned on for all businesses, and we sort of scope them out to see which ones reply. And I don't have the official numbers, but I've actually been messaging a lot of businesses lately for something very specific, and at least for me, a good 80-90% of them replied back within the hour, and there's a good 10% of them that never replied back, so maybe the email address we have for them isn't accurate. And so as we figure out which businesses don't actually reply back to the feature, we'll be turning it off for them automatically. But for Yelp, it's part of our, we want to make it easier for users to connect to businesses, and also from the business point of view, it's sort of useful for them to know as well that when they receive a phone call, it's sort of vague to see where that lead came from for them. They're spending a lot of money in Yellow Pages, and maybe on Yelp, and maybe on advertising. And so for them, it's very valuable to know if a lead came from Yelp. So they're really excited about message to business as well, because they can tie it back to Yelp, and they can actually figure out like, okay, this user, it's very convenient for you as a user, because you can just text them instead of having to call, and it's very useful for the business because they know where your lead came from. So it's a nice win-win for both. But hopefully the awkwardness around businesses not replying instantly will go away. And we'll actually also be turning on some functionality where we'll show you what the average response time is once we have more data on it.
Okay, we'll save the other questions towards the end. Yoni, thank you. I was going to ask you about my bad review on Yelp, but I can move on.
Bad review?
Just kidding. Thank you. All right, guys, we're moving right along. And our next 2 speakers are from AKQA, and it's great to hear from our hosts. Up next is Jordan Manning, and he's an interaction designer here at AKQA.
Can you hear me all right? I'm not a microphone designer. All right. First rule of Keynote is learning to swap the displays, which is of course hidden. All right, so thanks for the introduction. My name is Jordan Manning, and I'm an interaction designer, user experience designer, what have you, here at AKQA. I started on the Anheuser-Busch account, worked on that for around 9 months. I've been on Audi for the past 7 months now. So primarily, I'm tasked with feature enhancements. We've got a pretty cool responsive site. It's got a lot of great features. We've been making a lot of improvements, but one of the big things we're noticing is that a lot of the notions of sort of how the site should work that we had back when the site was pitched to Audi 3 years ago are not necessarily how things have turned out. So what I want to talk to you about today is looking at how we go from A to B to C to D to E, and whether or not that's necessarily the right step to take or whether there's another way to go entirely. So I like to think of my job as being about arranging information in an intelligent way. I didn't study user experience in the sense of HCI. I studied architecture and film and things like that, where it's very much about how do I come into a space, when I enter that space or when I see a new shot, what things set my expectations as to what's going to happen. So looking at UX, I think about the expectations I have when encountering an interface. For a self-guided activity, I can see, okay, there's 1, 2, 3 steps I have to take. What actions do I take to complete those steps? What outcomes do I get at the end? If I've done my job well, then people can move intuitively through that information. They get a sense of accomplishment, they feel a sense of agency, and they go, okay, cool, I've, clone stamped the hamster or something, or I've done something really cool with this UI. I've made some great accomplishment. The issue being is that now there's more information than ever. So whereas it used to be a desktop device, say the giant computer that your parents hid downstairs on Christmas Eve and had the reindeer screensaver running on it. Now we've got, I've got this microphone contraption strapped to me. I personally use a Garmin and spent an hour earlier trying to get it to just connect to Strava so I could upload a run. There's all of these things we interact with that are not just mobile devices, not just desktop devices, but of course wearables being a big thing right now, and I think something that's been going on for quite a while. So the issue here is that we connect in more ways than ever before. Looking at Android, there was a great headline on The Verge the other day talking about how it's the everything inbox. So one of those could very likely be your watch, and no matter which one it is, you're still sort of screwed in terms of that delivering information to you in an intelligent and relevant way. This is, of course, as I said, happening on more devices than ever before, whether that be an inappropriately scaled iPhone and iPad, which are, of course, nothing close to that. But the issue is that no matter what device this is happening on, this leads to the need for a lot of onboarding. So whether that be the Beats app and this crazy tapping on genres you like, things floating around, just entirely novel interactions that users really have no paradigm for. Looking at the shift away from straight up, the desktop analogy and being a little riskier with the choices we're taking, or whether it's these sort of guided activities, simple onboarding processes here. This is an app where you have to guess the first letter of a movie. So there's a few things we can look at. There's the Nintendo TV. This is a controller. It's trying to bridge the gap between your television and you. So you don't always have an iPad that connects directly to your TV. You can't always really use your phone. There's the need for these new devices that can start bridging that gap, start connecting things in meaningful ways. And from the start here, it looks really great. We've got American Idol, everyone loves that. Modern Family, The Colbert Report. As soon as we start to explore, though, and I tap this little icon in the corner, you get one of the craziest shit UI controllers I've ever seen, including rotating wheels that contain no less, in this display anyways, there are actually 30 buttons visible in the UI, and there are 14 on the controller itself. I couldn't figure out how to put this microphone, and I've been holding it for the past couple minutes. What the hell am I supposed to do with this thing when I'm just trying to watch American Idol? So the interesting thing I find about all this, and sort of how this applies to our work, with Audi, one of our big ideas was using Calzada to serve up intelligent versions of the homepage. So if you've been, looking at Toys R Us lately, probably a good guess that you've got a kid on the way. So let's start serving you up pictures of a car that are sort of closer to what your family needs. There's a lot of touch points we have, given that we now have so many devices, there are so many places we consume and produce content, that we can start to track users' behavior across the devices, and maybe I can say, all right, of the 30 buttons on here, many of which are not going to yield relevant data, but some of which could. Maybe I spend most of my time on the Food Network. We can start building an accurate portrait of a person online and translating that into meaningful content for them. So who's familiar with the Feltron Reporter app? Cool, thank you. So the idea behind this app being that throughout the day you're prompted to report on activities you're doing. So I am at work, I am eating, I am with Matthew Harwood or Chris Marsh or whoever. And you slowly, over the course of a year, build out this picture of yourself, this self-portrait, and you get a pretty robust visualization. So there's a lot of dots. I think this has something to do with pictures I took somewhere. It doesn't clearly indicate which ones I took while drunk, but that's probably the more erratic part of the picture. I can see, apparently being very excited about Russ and Jessica's wedding. Full disclosure, this is not mine, but I'd like to pretend it is because it looks like they have a pretty interesting life. But I can't really tell. And I go into other visualizations, and I sort of get a sense of my activity. So I can see that at some point I encounter this terrifying waterfall mountain rapid thing on the left. And then there are a few words in some movies I probably watched. And it's a really robust, complete picture of a person, but I sort of wonder how much sense it makes to the average user. As someone that compulsively tracks, things like running and cycling, we work very closely with the analytics department. In case it wasn't obvious, Rushi over there is one of our data scientists and has all sorts of odd insights that we like to apply to things. I mean, we're very big on this incredible sense of analytics and tracking here, but at the end of the day, there's also insight. This is a picture of friends that have more than 4 connections. One of the things we found in doing some work around Anheuser-Busch is that the best way to determine who an influencer is in any given network of friends is just to ask someone. See, data scientists laughing. So, I can create this really elaborate visualization. I can throw out a whole bunch of questions. I can run, machine learning algorithms. But at the end of the day, I can also just ask you who you think is interesting. I'm a firm believer in using analytics to improve site performance. We recently made a change to Audi USA that resulted in a 200% increase in performance over one day. And that was in submitting leads, which is not the easiest thing to do in the world. 200% in one day, and a pretty decent jump on mobile too, even though the changes we made were minimal. I think it boils down to what points we're going to connect. Imagine walking into a store, and whereas before I took an action online, several months later I visited a store, and I sort of remember what I was looking at, but there's really no cue that gets me from A to E. Because I could go, okay, I was on this online shop, I looked at this item, I'm in the store, they may have what I'm looking for, maybe if they do I can find it. Or we could start geofencing that store and go, given that this user has used our site before, there's cookies on their website, when they come into the store and open up the page, we can serve up content that they've looked at before and that we know is in stock. We can also maybe start using things like iBeacon, creating passes, serving up the exact piece of clothing that user was looking at. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but I just don't think it's about A, B, C, D anymore. There's a lot of new ways of doing these things, and it's not about the number of dots, it's about the dots that matter. So, thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. Hands up high for Jordan. Going once. Going twice. Okay.
Thank God.
Good stuff. All right, and finally tonight, let's welcome back Christopher. And as soon as Christopher is through, let me invite our speakers back to sit in these uncomfortably positioned, comfortable chairs.
I'm going to keep it relatively brief because you've been sitting here a while. Got a quick show of hands as to what the audience makeup was to start with. How many technologically inclined do we have? Awesome. So to keep you on your toes, I'm going to ask you a question. Have a think about it while I'm talking. It's nothing to do with UX. What's the largest number you can count up to sequentially on the fingers and thumbs of both hands? Think about that. So, from UI to no UI. Why no UI? Well, I come from a techie background. We've got no SQL, we've got no ops, a particularly aggressive form of DevOps. So I figured I'd coin the phrase no UI. Imagine my distress when I found out that, in fact, I wasn't the originator of this phrase, and it's a thing already. In fact, so no UI, as I've been reading up about it, is to do with invisible design, which is a contended term anyway, and I'm not really going to talk about that. So it's a catchy title, but basically what I'm looking at is better UI. So better UI, I look at desktop websites, and I see they're pretty clunky, so that they sort of evolved, and the user interface is fine, but it's really thick and stodgy. Yeah, Denis talked about seeing tortuous user journeys through a desktop website when he was talking about things, and I mean, I find myself in that situation where I've got no idea where I got to, and I have to hit the back button and get out to some place that I recognise in order to then move forward to somewhere else where I want to actually be. So we move forward from there. We've got responsive and adaptive. So responsive is great because you start to get a better experience. Adaptive is good. We can figure out things like I'm on a mobile, I'm out and about, so I probably want to see the store locator as opposed to the About Us page, something along those lines. After that, where are we going now? Well, I want to talk about some of the things that we've done recently, very briefly. This was the Make Our Mark campaign for Levi's that we ran, and basically this was taking some everyday items that we are familiar with in the physical world, and it was about digitizing them. So we took a guitar, Gibson guitar, and we connected that to SoundCloud. We took an Underwood typewriter, connected that to Twitter, Bolex movie camera, Graflex camera, both of those we connected to Instagram. And we ran a campaign where we had these on a train and we allowed people to use the instruments, and it integrated seamlessly with social. So what's the point about UI here? Well, these are items that we are familiar with. There is no UI here. None that we would understand anyway. Nobody would look at these items and figure out, well, let me understand the UI here. You would pick up a guitar if you're a guitarist and you would just play it. So I think this is a really interesting concept, and it's not new, this is not an original thought. The more interesting thing to me is how you start applying this elsewhere. And we've got companies, or we've got products like Ninja Blocks. So this is more or less a plug-and-play kind of system that allows you to take everyday objects and apply sensors to them and then plug them into the Internet of Things. This is really interesting to me. You just take your familiar surroundings and then you digitize them. You put them in the context of digital. Again, you've got Electric Imp, which is a very similar kind of concept, except it's a little bit more sophisticated, probably takes a bit more tech smarts. I mean, this ties in very much with what Daniel was talking about in terms of simplicity, mobility, and extensibility, taking these things like Ninja Blocks and taking everyday items around you and environments, and basically moving them around, keeping them simple, and giving you that plug-and-play ability to extend them. So the next thing I'll look at is the Up for Whatever campaign we ran for Bud Light. So here we took a pair of shoes and we applied lights to them, and we basically gave these shoes to people, and the lights would then direct them as to where they go. We took them on an adventure through various different experiences. So Stephen asked if wearables were actually fulfilling a need, pointed out that they were abandoned after 6 months. So I'll concede this is not greatly useful. I think it is a bit of fun. There is a logical conclusion to this, though, and that is to use something like a haptic feedback, for example. You could tie this into your mobile phone, and now instead of having to wander around like this with your Google Maps, you could just have your shoes directed where you want to go. So I mean, that's kind of, maybe that's a way out example right now, but I think this then allows you, again, to not have a UI. You program in exactly where you want to go, you put your phone in your pocket, there's no UI to deal with, and part of what you already have just tells you where you ought to go. So I find that kind of exciting that we're going to see more and more of this kind of thing where we have these kind of prompts built into our clothing. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about Nissan IDX. So Nissan IDX is a concept car. We worked with Nissan, who are one of our clients, on an Oculus Rift app. So we do a lot of automotive work, and we have configurators. The configurators usually allow you to pick wheels, you pick colours, you pick trim, you pick all of these things and you put them together in a linear or non-linear fashion and you come up with a car. So we had the idea here for co-creation. So co-creation means we work with the user to create the car. We had an Oculus Rift experience, so a virtual reality experience, and you would go through different environments. For each environment you would look to the left and you would look to the right and you would see something different. You'd see a ninja or you'd see a samurai, and you can explore this environment. It was amazing. Based on your preferences, the system would then build the car for you. So this is not imperative, it's now allowing you, it's sensing what you are, what you feel, and it's creating the car for you in an immersive environment. I think the most telling thing about this is that we launched it at the Detroit Motor Show. And people were queuing for 70 minutes at a motor show to use this thing. It's 70 minutes of standing there being surrounded by the world's best shiny, and it's waiting to get involved with this Oculus Rift experience, which took about, I think, between 7 and 11 minutes. So I think that's less, for me, that's less about the actual work that we did. That's more telling about people's attitudes towards this kind of thing, and how effective virtual reality is going to be. So I promised to keep it short. That's a little bit about the past, the future. Well, combine, refine, and invent. So combining things, we have Oculus Rift already. It's pretty clunky, right? We've got companies like Cast AR with our augmented reality goggles. We talked to a company called LabRat recently who have got real-time augmented reality telepresence. I think if you put all of these things together, you can start to see something that fairly soon we're going to have the real-time telepresence that somebody was talking about, Mr. Stephen. Refine, again, taking what we've got, we take some of these things like the Oculus Rift. It is too clunky for mainstream use all the time right now, but you can see when you streamline it, when you introduce a power supply, you can turn it into something that would be usable every day on the bus. And invent. So we can combine things, we can refine them, and we're going to be constantly inventing. We'll bring new parts into the equation, and we'll bring these things together, and we will create new things. Thank you very much.
Bruce, thank you. Okay, let's invite our speakers back to just grab a seat over here, and we'll just sit here quietly while you guys look at us.
Oh, sorry, one more thing. What is the largest number you can count up to sequentially on the fingers and thumbs of both hands?
Engineers.
And you guys said you were technologically inclined. 1,023.
Now explain that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5.
All right, I'm going to just throw a question out there, and I'm going to pull Liberty Madison into the mix here, because she's awesome, also known as that tech girl, so she knows what she's talking about. Let me just start with what is it that keeps you guys up at night? Is it that pass you have to make in the legal department to get shit cleared? Is it that asshole in marketing that just doesn't get it? What is it? What is it that really gets you, inspires you to do better, but you're kind of pissed that you have to do it? Go.
Well, I think, not that I'm pissed about doing it, but what does keep me up at night is actually one of the second strategy I talked about, the solid scenarios, is what keeps you up at night is I'm nervous is we designed the whole product, we think we have it all locked down, and the user's working through it, and we missed something. We missed something in, you were showing, Jordan, right? You're showing the lines, the A to B, that we missed something in there, that we missed something in the scenario that then caused us to miss something in there, and it didn't work out. But you catch all this if you do solid user design and user testing, is that before you even release it, you're testing this out. You're testing this out with real users. So anything you do, you catch. And you're doing iterative design. You're doing it. So even though we're living in a faster world of cloud and releasing, and we're more tempted to release quickly, it's really important to do that user testing because you'll catch those things really quickly. And we know how it is now too, is if you make those mistakes, bam, it gets put up all over social media, or you'll get written up in the tech blogs, and they'll say, oh, you missed this, you missed that, and your reputation goes down. So put in the time for the user testing, because you'll get a lot out of it.
One of the things that does keep me up at night is my 10-month-old. No, sleeps here at night. I mean, with one of the things with designing for Yelp is I've sort of lost, or we as a team, we release Yelp itself. We push code 3 times a day to Yelp main, so we push a lot of code. We're on a 2-week release cycle, so we release often. We do user tests, but we don't do it as often as we could, basically because we want to ship. And we'll see if something's wrong, and we'll take action on it. So we have the best user testers in the world, our users. And so what actually keeps me up at night is there's no real sense of urgency. Is since I've started working, the team and myself started working on the app, we've made, although our product is complex and it has grown in complexity because we add features all the time, it's actually gotten better. The user experience has gotten easier to use, simpler to use. I'm sort of just thinking of ways to create simplicity after complexity. Like, we're complex now, how do we grow the product but make the product easier to use, easier to understand going forward? And it's not something that has to be done overnight, but you can fill a couple minutes with that.
I would say, from Samsung's perspective, we make a great variety of products, and I think the safety of our users is probably the thing that I probably worry most about. And then secondly, from a business perspective, how can we continue to be competitive in light of very strong Chinese competition?
I'll be going to bed around 11:30, and I'll open my email, and I will see something from one of the Salesforce products, and the email will look like it's from 1999. And then another email will come across, and it'll be another Salesforce product, and that will look modern, and on brand, and on message. And I think to myself, customers are getting so many different messages, and what keeps me up at night is someone's pushing the button to publish and not going through UX. And so one of the challenges is that is being an advocate, being also the educator, and working with a company that has focused so much on its UX within product, but in terms of a website that has been around for 10 years without a UX, anybody. And that is one of the biggest challenges, is trying to get that consistency, learning that ecosystem, finding where those gaps are, being the one person who's trying to build a department that I mentioned I was hiring, and seeing those emails go out and going, you know, we owe more to our customers and more to people who are going to be touching Salesforce.com with a much more consistently branded experience, because consistency ends up being credibility.
See, I'm doing this wrong because I actually used to work for SAP, and I left at 5 every day, and now honestly, working here keeps me up at night. But I think it's because there are so many problems here to solve, so I've always said I'll gladly work until 1:30 if need be, because the nice thing about working in advertising, which we're sort of, I think AKQA is sort of advertising and sort of not, it's half and half, but there are just so many interesting projects going out the door, and there's just such a diverse range of client requests that as soon as you stop thinking about one thing, a whole new set of problems pops into your head, and those are the problems that seem impossible to solve, and they take quite a while, but if you just think about them all the time, eventually something comes to fruition. So I find that just always thinking keeps me awake. Although I go to bed at 10, so.
So it doesn't really keep me up at night, but I think one of the challenges that I see is when we measure the wrong things. So, this moves sort of from UX to analytics and back again, but the kind of thing I mean is by measuring page clicks or something like that, and cheering, not really understanding the business impact of what's going on, and not really understanding, not measuring or ignoring the fact that you've got a whole bunch of people who are hitting your site once and then it's not impacting your business at all, but thinking it's a success. Again, when you're looking at metrics, you see one go down, the other go up. This could have a huge positive impact on your bottom line, and yet, perhaps because something's gone down, then that's a perceived failure, and you're asked to fix that. So I think it's more about understanding UX, understanding user behavior, understanding testing, understanding technology, bringing all of those things together to get an effective outcome for the actual business.
Excellent. Do we have any questions from the audience at all? Anybody have any questions they want to ask guys?
This might cause some problems, but as UX people, you guys understand the framing effect and you guys understand anchoring. Should privacy settings be opt-in or opt-out? And as UX designers, how do you see the future of privacy settings being displayed? I mean, I think Yoni's slides on explaining how they sort of redid the privacy settings sort of set this in my mind, and I think Yelp did a great. I think Yelp's thing was perfect. It had the center to be aligned at a place where it was neutral. It didn't have any sort of fluctuations here and there. But as UX people and as people who work for some of the biggest firms that do deal with our securities, what do you think privacy settings should look like in the future?
It's a lot easier for me to answer that than I think most companies because we don't really sell advertising. So from a Samsung perspective, we think you should opt out of privacy and everything should be set to the highest possible setting when you start off. So I recognize that it's easy for us to say that.
I'll share a little bit more on the Yelp one because you did find some learnings out of it. I think being very transparent just helps a lot. And so we did sort of default our users to the middle settings, which was still very vague. It doesn't give a name. It's just a man or a female from San Francisco went to your business. But what was actually surprising to us is we didn't actually anticipate anyone to sort of use the super transparent setting. We sort of built it in mostly for sort of anchoring, so you can sort of see what the range is. But we actually saw quite some users opt in to the very non-privacy setting and sort of trying to figure out. We asked a bunch of them, and it was actually sort of interesting that users actually did mind privacy, but they sort of, especially for Yelp's point of view, they actually wanted the business owner to see who they were and that they were interacting with their businesses and they were doing business and inquiring about things or calling, and they didn't worry about, they didn't worry as much about privacy as we sort of thought they would, or they were actually very open about it, or they even saw the privacy apparently as a negative thing because they turned it off, and they wanted sort of, that visibility. So, fairly interesting. I think, transparency helps.
I'll just say this, that we have really long pages on Salesforce.com for our products, and we can't even track scroll depth because privacy is the #1 important thing at Salesforce. I can't stress that enough. So for, at least from my perspective, is that privacy comes first, particularly in the business-to-business arena. And we take it so seriously that it actually affects, analytics from what we can be able to track.
I think it comes down to context and expectations, right? So if I have my Samsung TV, I would be hoping by default they're definitely not sharing my channel on it. That's something I would definitely not expect and I would opt in. But if I'm using a vehicle like Twitter, my goal there is I'm putting out my tweet, I want that to blast out to as many people as possible. So I would expect that to be nice and public. But maybe on a social network, if I'm showing maybe pictures of like an intimate dinner with my family, I think a next step for the big social networks is actually tweaking those privacy settings intelligently. Saying, if I'm sharing something very, very intimate and subtle, and maybe I've tagged some people very close related to me, let's keep that private. But if I'm saying I'm announcing some event, like I announced this event on Facebook, I want that to be public. So I think that it really comes down to context, and I'm not going to harp back to my talk again, but you really got to understand your users and the context. That's what it really comes down to. But that would be really cool as the social networks start sharing things intelligently based on your usage and expectations. But key, being respectful to your users. And I think that's where people get really frustrated with social networks, is you're not showing that respect.
Yeah, I completely agree in the context situation. I was thinking of how I'll give some platforms heart rate data and others I don't even want them to see my avatar. So it entirely depends what you're using. It's obviously very different across campaigns where actually a lot of privacy is handled just through authentication. So doing a lot of Facebook apps, so any site that uses their Facebook login has a Facebook app running in the background. Doing that for clients like Anheuser-Busch, so with Bud Light, Stella Artois, things like that, where the user's made aware up front as soon as they click connect, and that's their age gate, as well as letting them know exactly how much information we're retrieving from them. A lot of people are hesitant to do that, and you can really see that aversion to privacy and drop off, and I think that's where you have a responsibility to ask less of your users and really let them opt in, let them decide how much information they're going to give to you, and I think be really explicit in any situation where you're forcing a login on someone. That's...
So you're saying an opt-out?
I just think anytime you're forcing someone to log in or authenticate in some way is when you need to be very careful around what data you're collecting from them, because a lot of people, I mean, for your experience, you're going to get less people authenticating, and yeah, they're probably going to opt out entirely. With Facebook changing its permissions so that it used to be that posting was more of a mandatory option, and now a lot of people can skip that. It actually breaks a lot of user experience. So you need to be really upfront with people that maybe a key part of your app is you need to opt into these following sort of permissions, which could violate your privacy, but will also give you a better user experience. It entirely depends on who you're creating for.
Great, great. I've got a quick question for you. Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. So I know that as you kind of touched on it earlier, when you were talking about bringing the Salesforce team and getting them into the whole UX, UI, and kind of pulling teeth there. So since everyone here is in UX, UI, can you give them some takeaways on what they can do in case their company is a bit hesitant, besides doing the eye tracking, which we love you for that. So what can they take away from this talk and kind of get their startup or their company on board?
I think one of the things that's helped me, I was in advertising for a long time. It's my first in-house really kind of experience. I think one of the main things is to really talk in narrative form. Narrative form is something that's relatable. Daniel, I think you said earlier about empathy. I can't stress that word enough. One of the things I think from my own experience, having been a teacher, was that I learned a lot about empathy. And when you're able to kind of give even an oral history of another website or a case study that you've read, when you're able to relate that and not bring in the jargon, but to really talk to them on a one-to-one level and kind of see the empathy and see where the stakeholder is coming from, and then also bridge that story or that narrative for users and kind of enlighten how users can grasp on the narrative. And really, at the end of the day, it's that and numbers. And if you can make a story out of the numbers and guide people along, part of his brown bag lunches, showing case studies, and there's certainly a lot on there online around UX Mag, and there's plenty of studies now that will help facilitate that. One of the small tools in an arsenal for a UX practitioner is really Google Scholar. It is amazing how many people don't use Google Scholar, but if you use Google Scholar, you can actually come up with academic journals, peer-reviewed research, and find the data and the studies out there. That gives you a little bit of a halo effect. I admit that's manipulative in some respects, but it is a way to kind of at least get some science behind you if you don't have the analytics team or the analytics aren't tracking the right things. So that's somewhat of an advice. I hope that's helpful.
Did anybody else have any advice that they could give?
Really? No advice?
Yeah. Well, definitely UX is a differentiator now. It used to be, it's a side thing, it's a nice thing, especially at the enterprise level. The consumer level is always there, but enterprise level, this is a big differentiator now, especially the back-end infrastructure is cheaper. You can go deploy your services on Amazon, you can deploy it on other third-party clouds and things like that. You can get up and running. But at the end of the day, what's winning deals is the UX, and that's the differentiator. And the people involved in the boardroom making those decisions, that's where they're looking at the UX. And UX wins deals. When they're looking between your products, and even people, and especially your startups, right?
So when venture capitalists are meeting with you, looking at stuff, if they're deciding between to fund you or someone else, they're going to be looking at your UI. If they see it's nice and polished, I think they think you have your stuff together, and they know they're putting design at the forefront. And we see what it did for a certain UX, certain computer company, and how that just changed everything. But the big thing is you want to show ROI. You can do that through stuff like Jordan mentioned. This, he could cite clear statistics. We did a couple UI tweaks, 200% gain. Wow, if you present that to your clients, or you present that to the people running your startup, so why you need more UI designers, that's going to get it. You do eye tracking studies. You show the improvement. You're gonna get that stuff. You do the user testing, and one of the big things I'm really proud of, especially with enterprise stuff, is getting task completion time down. And if you can reduce that by a few seconds, think about that, especially for like a large company, like General Electric. Imagine if you reduce the task time down per employee just a few seconds. Now multiply that by the hundreds of thousands of employees, and then multiply that by 365 days a year. You know how much money that's going to save that company? That's huge. And when you start talking numbers in ROI, that's how you can sell UX, and that's how you can get more UX in your organization. And that's how companies are going to choose you as their client or their vendor, because you put UX first. And that means you put their business first and their priorities first.
Thanks. So, piece of advice from me is UX is important, right? But work with the other disciplines. Work together rather than treating it as a production pipeline where you have a UX activity and maybe you have a creative activity, and maybe you hand off to technology and they implement it. An example is that for some recent work that we did, we ran a hackathon, an internal hackathon. We had 3 teams, and we gave them 12 hours. And we had Jordan working there, we had UX, we had these different disciplines all working together. We gave them a load of food and drink, pizza, I believe. No, it was sushi Ritos, whatever they are. It's like somebody had taken 2 foods that anyway. So yeah, we gave them 12 hours and they presented at the end. And what we got out of this is we got some really polished stuff. We got polished presentations, we got working prototypes, we had input from all of the different disciplines. We ended up with great UX. But you know what, we also had some working stuff as well. We wouldn't have got that if we'd gone through that. Now looking at what we achieved in 12 hours from each of these 3 teams, and imagining what we'd done if we'd given Jordan a brief, and then asked them to fulfill that brief, and then pass it off to some of the other disciplines and end up with tech. I don't know how long that would have taken. So again, with the startups here, treat this as a collaborative effort. Get the right UX feedback in, get the UX excellence as we know we should have, but also bring it together in a collaborative environment.
I just want to add actually to that. I did for another client, did a similar thing. But one of the things that what's really collaborative is also bringing in the user as a collaborative effort as well. And so what we did is in our hackathons is we had identified roles and responsibilities in the group. We went out and bought $5 Starbucks cards, went out to Starbucks, and actually just started having people mess with our paper prototype. And it was amazing. It was really enlightening. But what happens is there's a collaborative effort. There's not just with the team and the people and the kind of the gut check. Don't be afraid to actually talk to people and your users, or who you think might be your users, and just go out there and go to the Ferry building, for example, or go outside of AT&T Park and just ask people to be tapping around on a paper prototype or a prototype on your iPad. It's amazing the kind of insight and the rapport you'll get with the user.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Anyone else? Well, I want to thank you guys so much, and especially to Myles for SF New Tech and AKQA for allowing this event to happen. This is the second time that we've done it, and it's just been phenomenal both times. So thank you guys so much, and Myles.
Thank you, Chris. With that, we'll call it a night. There might be extra pizza and salad and
That was pizza.
We'll see you next time.
That is boring. I need to report I wrote
Hello, ladies. Zane, hold this up. Somebody had left this in the ladies' room. If it looks familiar, come and grab it, or find your friend that has it.